Hi, everybody. This is Chris. And hey, Al, what time is it?
Chris, it is time for another Readiness Rewired, and which is a healthcare preparedness podcast, and I'm excited to get another one in the books here.
As am I, but we should let listeners and viewers know that we're missing one person. Mike, who's normally with us and our technical guy, is on assignment, and in a couple more podcasts, he'll be rejoining us and probably have some stories to tell. But in the meantime, you and I are carrying the banner forward, and we've got a great guest today. We asked to talk to Dutch Geisinger, who Dutch, you want to give us just an introduction of where you're at today? Because we're going to actually go back through your resume, and you've got some really interesting positions and things that hopefully views to share with us.
And
Yeah.
before Dutch gets going there, I wanna just remind people, because Mike is here, Chris and Mike and I are a three-legged stool. And when you're missing one of those legs, things can go south real
It's
quick.
wobbly.
So
It's
Dutch,
wobbly at best.
So Dutch, hang on, because without Mike here,
we're
who
looking
knows
for
what'll
him.
happen.
That makes Dutch the third leg. We're looking for his support on this, right?
Yeah. So there you go, Dutch. Take it away, man.
I'm excited to be the third leg. That's great.
Ever the politician on that.
Yeah.
What are you doing currently?
Right now, I am the Deputy Director for Polk County Emergency Management here in Des Moines, Iowa, and been here for about 4 years now. I'm going to let Chris kind of lead me into the rest of the resume, but I've been here about 4 years. I have a good friend that asked me. I was trying to retire, and AJ Mum, our director, asked me if I would come over and be his deputy director for a little while, and I'm still here. So he must be okay with what I'm doing.
You didn't get a definition of a little while.
It's a very good point.
Wow. Well, we're retired, so we appreciate, or at least partially retired at Al's case, so we can appreciate from afar the working man and everything that you're doing. And we'll kind of probably finish off talking about what some of the projects are and experiences you've had there at Polk County. But let's go back to kind of the beginning, if we can, Dutch. Your involvement in emergency management was like around 2003, isn't it? Or did you start in something before that?
Yeah, and 2003 really started me with the state of Iowa. I was the Homeland Security Program Manager there, and really my involvement in emergency management started well before that with my military career and with law enforcement. A lot of people don't view law enforcement more as a regulatory agency, but if you're doing it right, really that focus on emergency management and preparedness and all of those things plays a big part of that as well.
Awesome. So frontline, first responder, military. What role did you have in the military? I know you had probably a lot of different exposures, but what was your primary position?
I was a light infantry guy, so I did a lot of walking, a lot of carrying things around, digging holes wherever I was told, that kind of stuff.
So that's what you do today too, right? Although the holes are metaphysical. You're just punching holes and stuff, right?
Yep.
So you had those frontline experiences, and then in 2003 you joined the state of Iowa. Was it a new department? It was Department of Public Defense, I think it was called at that time, right?
We were part of the Department of Public Defense, but we were actually an existing agency. It was Homeland Security. The Homeland Security Division had just been stood up. It was an emergency management state agency at the time. Civil Defense had been part of that, but they brought in the branch of Homeland Security. I was asked to come in initially just to be a trainer and go around the state and make people more aware of what Homeland Security was when it came to a state agency, but it evolved into developing programs and kind of a grant management position as well. A lot of funds were available at the time through the Department of Homeland Security, and trying to manage those and make sure that they were going in the right directions.
So that was probably about 2 years after a year or 2 years after 9/11. And if I remember, I was a very young, maybe not so young person, but there was a lot of stuff. Grants were really based on getting a lot of stuff. And then there were some of the basic trainings, the FEMA, NIMS, the the 100, 200, 300, 400, 700, 800 courses. Is that your recollection too, that was a lot of the focus back then?
Yeah, that's actually exactly what I was hired for. So when they started rolling out the grants, um, there really weren't a lot of restrictions that went along with it. It was basically if it was on the authorized equipment list, you could buy it. So we had folks in rural counties that had 4,000 people with a giant command trailer that could house almost all 4,000 people. So trying to manage that and get it into a more succinct version, practical, things that fit where they belonged. That was one of the focuses when I first got hired. And you're absolutely right with the training. It was those restrictions didn't exist either. So FEMA came out and said, you know what, if you're going to take the money, you've got to be trained in ICS. You've got to understand NIMS and what NIMS is all about. And that's kind of how I got brought in was I needed to go around the state and provide that training opportunity for all those agencies. And it wasn't just the emergency management folks. It was all of our law enforcement agencies, our fire departments, hospitals, schools. We brought everybody in to do the education piece of it.
So, and again, Al reminds me of this too, that we need to, we threw out some acronyms there. And if people are new to emergency management, the ICS is the Incident Command System. And then NIMS is the National Incident Management System that has had some presidential directives to kind of put some oomph behind it to say, hey, let's standardize everything so everybody's speaking from the same hymnal and we're calling the same things by the same terms. Is that right? I mean, that's sort of what those are built around.
Yep, you nailed it. And we still struggle with that today. That's been one of the obstacles is just trying to walk through some things that we're working on today with programmatic differences between fire agencies that we've got the NIMS typing, the National Incident Management System typing that came out as part of Presidential Directive 22 that you would think that that was back in 2003, 2004 timeframe. You'd think we'd be there by now, but we still struggle with that. So as we move through trying to standardize some of our communication systems and computer-aided dispatch systems, those kind of things, we still find that there's trying to make those response plans similar can be pretty difficult sometimes just because people are embedded in the ways they've done things forever. So trying to get them to adopt a new system or a standardized system is a little bit difficult sometimes.
And I'm curious, Dutch, because I've done, being an emergency preparedness guy, I've had to do, and I've done the IS 700, 100, 200, 300, 400, and then blah blah blah, on and on and on. What in your trainings, and going around, I'm curious, what was your frustration with some of the training? Because when I've seen, it's like it's a once and done type thing. And not that I want to get into multiple, repeats of training, because you get into some of those ICS courses, they're the IS courses, and boy, they can make something very simple long and drawn out, yet it's good stuff. So I've kind of compacted and cut down at the hospital level to give them the basics, give them the umbrella overview, and let them understand what's going on. Now, I don't do a national FEMA certificate, but I do a state of Iowa certificate that they have said is okay. In your trainings and stuff, I'm curious, what'd you run into that was kind of frustrating to you as you went around the state and trained with people who were very excited to do it and people on the other end of the scale that didn't want to be there?
One of the first difficulties was convincing people that they were very excited to do it. So ICS is one of those courses that when you're approached with it, usually it's hey, in order for us to get federal money, preparedness money, you've got to take this class. If we approached it a little bit differently and got the mindset to be, you're really going to benefit from this class and this is how you're going to benefit, we'd have a lot easier time selling the classes. So usually when I come into a class, and we walk through this initially because FEMA initially in 2003, when they came out with those classes, they tried to personalize those. So you had incident command systems for law enforcement, incident command systems for schools. Um, it got so diluted, so confusing that you tried to bring in a picture of how it pertains specifically to a school. Really, the focus of incident command should be, how do you fit into an incident command structure? What's your role? Well, what's the piece that you put into it? What part do you play? So it's not just for your school, that incident command structure. It's law enforcement and fire are going to show up for whatever type of disaster you're having right now. Where do you fit in, and how do you help push that incident command system forward and make it better? So I still teach those classes. I still go out as a contractor, and I teach ICS 300, 400, the more advanced classes. And I really try to focus in on making the folks realize, I guess, that it really does fit them. It might be a special event, or it might be an actual type of disaster, or something that's specific to the location, but trying to better explain to them how it actually pertains to them and what role they're going to play as part of that incident command structure. That's been kind of a hurdle to overcome, just because those classes can be, if you just teach the FEMA slides, if you've looked at those, they are very wordy, very long, and very generic. So it doesn't necessarily say this is how you fit into those structures. Another one of those difficulties is, just like every other acronym, Chris, you pointed it out, that we're acronym driven folks, but FEMA is also form driven. And when you talk about incident command systems, there's a form for everything. So when you start breaking out the FEMA forms and saying, okay, in order for you to do this, you have to have an ICS 202A filled out, you watch their eyes glaze over pretty quickly when you're trying to introduce those things to them. But if you can lay it out in a pattern that makes sense, that this is why you're doing that, you're developing those objectives so you can make those assignments, so you can order the things that you need to have and do a gaps analysis. All of those things are stuff that people do every day, but it puts a little bit of a formality to it. So some of the struggles are just making sure that the instructor, whoever that is able to show them real life, this is how it's going to work out, and this is why these things are important to you.
Yeah, great point.
Yeah, I think one of my pet projects concerns on ICS is it is really built and out of a need, and that need is interagency work, and that's those in FEMA's incident complexity types. The most complex, biggest, messiest ones are type 1s, and then it goes to type 2 and type 3,
right,
and then 4 and 5. And ICS is built for 3, 4, and 5. I mean 3, 2, and 1. Those biggest ones, right? That are by their definition interagency, which you can rely on each other or organizations such as your county emergency managers to help guide the process, facilitate the ICS process. Hospitals, for example, which we both come from as private entities, don't operate and don't see ICS, the concepts in their day-to-day practice. Right. So to suddenly pivot during an incident is really uncomfortable. And Mike's not here, but we used to talk about triage tags. Triage tags are these great things to use in a disaster, but nobody ever practices with them. And when that disaster happens and the pucker factor hits and your vision narrows, the last thing you're thinking about is, where's that thing that I've never practiced with? So at some point, maybe a topic for another day, is taken, and FEMA doesn't have to do this, but somebody does, take incident command, and even the word command is a struggle for non-military, non-public entities, and scale it to, hey, it's a disruption or incident, needs to be managed. These scale from things that you do very easily, very quickly, and as they scale up, we continue to use these principles, right? The management by objectives. We can use common language and redundancy. They all make sense. There's just not any content that I think hospitals and all could go to that say, hey, I love this. It teaches my new people how to manage a disruption or incident that they're not normally used to. So you've done a out of necessity, again, post 9/11 and the interagency gaps that occurred. That's there, and remains a struggle. But I think part of it is, we're building a building without that foundation. But hopefully, we'll find that somewhere.
Yeah, you bet.
So, did you find in those early days, you were dealing with critical infrastructure protection? So you were helping people identify that, hey, your job is, what you offer is critical, and you need to take this training. You got that going. You got involved with public outreach, kind of seeing maybe how uneven the terrain is in understanding and engaging in emergency management. And then in 2009-ish, so it's about 6 years, you really, and I think most of the time during that, you did deal with that same mindset from the federal government, right? Of, we don't have enough stuff, you're not practicing and maintaining your stuff, and we still don't have, to saturate 200 million people with that training, that mission was still ongoing. But then you pivoted to a different position. You tell us a little bit about that and what you did there?
Sure. And I'm going to back up just a second first, though.
Yeah.
One of the things you hit on there has been sort of a pet peeve of mine, is that we've come out with restrictions and rules. Sorry about that. I had a call come in. But we've always had these plans. There's always been a number of reasons that we develop plans. Some of our long-term care facilities, home health care, places like that, it's a pretty new concept to them. But they've come out with rules through Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services that,
right,
hey, you've got to have these high-quality emergency plans, and you've got to do exercises. But very little training has come out to help people with that, to show them how to do it and what it means to hold a tabletop exercise, or what it means to do a full-scale exercise, and the work that goes into that. The requirements are there for them to do an annual full-scale exercise, and anybody that's done that as part of their life or their career knows that it's not a 12-month process. You can do it in 12 months, but to do it every single year in 12 months is hard. That is a really difficult task. It's not realistic. It's not practical. It's one of those things that we've really tried to help some of those smaller entities, even our hospitals. Actually, if you build the best plan in the world and you set it on a shelf and you don't do the training that goes along with that to teach people what's expected of them in their roles and responsibilities, and then do the practice, the exercises, the tabletop exercises, the full-scale exercises, your plan isn't worth that much. It's something that's going to be put on a shelf. It's going to be taken out in 3 years and reviewed and put back on the shelf again. So until you can get into that concept or that mindset that it's a practical application of what your plan's going to do and how it's going to make you better, we've got to get to that point, and we've got to do it practically. We can't just do an exercise that FEMA recommends or CMS recommends. It's got to be something that fits your facilities, and make sure that we can make those things fit together, that we have those requirements. Let's make it so it's practical for your facility and you guys actually get something out of it. So really, I wanted to hit on that before I talked about the next step in my career. So
if we could, Dutch, because I love that point, just build on that a little bit, that it's in an integration, right? It's not, fulfilling a requirement, checking the box, and now turning my attention elsewhere.
Yep.
It's almost like we ought to be looking at it as a football team. I mean, as an incident, and part of it, I think, is that we characterize it as a disaster response. In disasters, people look at the worst of the worst, and really the same tools and the same process, as you mentioned, you can use for pre-planned events where you have large populations coming in all. And if we can practice more, nobody expects to field a football team that practices once a year and expect them to do well. So I think what we're missing is that really owning it, and I think part of that comes from reimagining it's maybe not even emergency management, it's incident management. I mean, we're emergency management coordinators, right? But and that gets confused with emergency departments for those that's in healthcare. It's really, it's incidents, it's disruptions, it's urgencies, it's a and I know you guys deal with that in your current job all over the place. So one of the big things was planning that you addressed, and I think that kind of role comes into, and you did a lot of that teaching that came into that next position you took. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So Department of Homeland Security at the time, it was National Preparedness and Programs Directorate, developed a concept that they needed to have somebody that represented the Secretary of Homeland Security in every state. And it was somebody that would go out to critical infrastructure, recognize critical infrastructure assets throughout the country, and help them with preparedness, training, exercises, anything basically that they needed to make them more secure, more stable, introduce programs that were offered by the federal government. It was a non-regulatory organization. It's now called CISA, Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity. I'm going to get that title completely messed up.
Agency.
Cyber and Infrastructure Security Agency. We weren't that back in the day. We were National Preparedness and Programs Directorate, Field Operations. So I was selected to be one of those protective security advisors for South Dakota. And I was there for about 6 years working in that capacity. We responded to disasters all over the country. We helped our critical infrastructure during a disaster gain resources, gather equipment, collect information, share information. We work really closely with our state partners, the governors in those states, to better provide information, better collect information for the Secretary of Homeland Security as well. So a lot of moving parts to that. But really the biggest thing that we did was we developed a process for doing vulnerability assessments for critical infrastructure, critical assets. It's hard to make a distinction because not every asset is the same, as you guys both know. It's you can't just develop the process that fits hospitals or that fits oil refineries or water treatment facilities. We had to develop a process that could be used in any of those things and adapt to the different culture, the different nomenclature, all of those things that go into those different types of facilities. So it was a great job. It was probably the best job I've ever had. Fantastic position. Gave me an opportunity to respond to some national disasters in Texas and on the East Coast as well, and act in a capacity as that advisor from the Secretary of Homeland Security.
Tell us about, if you would, what did you learn? Because that was more of a regional, I mean, it was a state level, but you had regional and national interactions. What that would be about, 10, 15 years ago. What was the interaction like? Was there a lot of like more sophisticated and really developed areas of the country that seem to have, because obviously states develop systems differently and the responses are differently. And you were at an elevation that you could kind of see and maybe evaluate, and I'm sure at that time swap things back and forth. Where were some of the areas you really said, wow, you guys got your shit together, stuff together?
You know, it depends on where you were at and what you were looking at, because every part of the country had things that they'd been a focus item and they did a great job. The Midwest, believe it or not, was far more advanced than some of the cities on the East Coast. California had some really good stuff that they'd done with water preservation because it was a really focus area for them. Some ideas that we could steal. And that was one of the best things that we got out of that position, was that
Right.
all of those states operated in silos. They all had things that they were really good at, but it had never really crossed the borders of those states and gone into other areas. Through that program, we were able to come back as a region, and I was FEMA Region 7 was kind of how we worked. I was in 8 initially, so we had a really large region, pulled back to Region 7 after that, but we were able to bring those things across state lines. And like over here, they're doing a really good stuff with our dams.
Right.
Let's talk about how we can adopt that in other regions, other parts of the country, and make it work. Some of the agencies that had a footprint in multiple states, they still operate in those silos. They were still water reclamation comes to mind because they had control over several levees across the country, but they did things independently in their own states where they operated, or their own regions where they operated, that were different than how they did it in other regions. We were able to bring some of those things to light and take all the good parts out and dump the bad parts and help improve some of those agencies. So yeah, that was one of the best things that we had. Some of the obstacles that we had are things that I'm sure you guys could both talk about forever. And communication, one of the things that I always say is, if you do an exercise or you do training, communication is one of those things that's going to fail. And we're getting better. We're getting much better. But when we crossed state lines, or we crossed out of those regions, those FEMA regions, man, it was like you were entering a whole new world again, and you had to retrain yourself and refocus. So trying to break down some of those barriers, that was a great thing that we made a lot of strides forward in doing some of those things. Some of the programs that were developed while I was there, you guys have both heard of Run, Hide, Fight, I'm sure.
Yep.
That was part of the National Preparedness and Programs Directorate.
Cool.
If you see something, say something. That all came out of that same group, and we actually stole that from New York, but don't tell those guys that. We don't want to give them any credit. But
they take
a lot
it
of
anyway.
But a lot of those programs we were able to take because we saw good stuff and we saw good things coming out of them, and we were able to run those across the entire country and adopt them, adapt them, whatever we needed to do to make them fit in those other parts.
You know, and Dutch, I'm going to jump in here because Chris knows your background, because you and Chris have been associated for a while. This is the first meeting, and we talked before we hit the record button here today. We talked a little bit. This is our first meeting, and it's kind of strange because, you know, I'm out in Polk County a lot, but as a visitor, not a worker. But you know, you talked about the plans on the shelves. You talked about, you know, we need to practice that stuff, and for our listeners and some of the people we hope follow us as podcast listeners, you know, when we talk about training people and talk about, Chris mentioned the football team, you know, and the practicality of it all. The thing, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. The thing that I always tell everybody is, look, you know, if you've got, you know, 50 people at your organization, or you have 4,000 or 10,000 people at your organization, you might not be able to train everybody, but you train the key people. And once the key people understand, if you've trained the right people, they'll respond and they'll help, you know, get the ball rolling. So you keep it there. And that's one thing that I always stress to the emergency preparedness coordinators that I work with is, don't worry about eating the whole elephant. Pick the pieces that taste good and eat them, and then, you know, move from there. You know, give me some thoughts on that, and where you go with, you know, because you've done a lot of training and educating for people.
Yeah, I love that analogy. It's 100% true. If you try to, I mean, I've watched people just shut down because they're assigned. All of a sudden, you're the emergency manager, and it's like, oh no, now what do I do? And if you Google emergency management, it really doesn't help you a lot because you get 400,000 pages of just gobbledygook that doesn't really help you a whole lot. Same thing with the training. If you've got that training program assigned to you, you really need to break down those essential roles and responsibilities so that you can train the right people. And if you try to train everybody on the entire plan, you're going to get the same thing. It's not going to be effective. It's going to be a hodgepodge of people that'll take away something, but it's not going to be effective. So if you can design that training really to fit those key roles and responsibilities, the things that you can gain out of that truly really depend on the agency. But what I found is, by training those key players, those that are usually in a leadership position, so they better understand what's expected of them during any kind of a crisis situation or an incident or whatever it might be, they can take that back and they can share that with their team of, hey, during a disaster, this is what I'm going to be doing. This is what's expected of you. And they can train their individual players. One of the things that I really pushed out, we developed some things, we called them Take 5 scenarios. And Chris, I don't know if you remember these or not, but it was something that when I transitioned into a different role after the role with Department of Homeland Security, we had an opportunity to do outreach to a number of different companies. And these scenarios were really intended rather than to do a full exercise, because if you try to bring people in and explain how to do a tabletop exercise or a full scale exercise, let's just bring a small group together. Let's bring part of your organization together, and we're going to give them a scenario and we're going to ask them 4 or 5 questions. And it's basically a miniature tabletop exercise. But it lets people have an opportunity for two-way communication on, oh, I didn't expect that I was supposed to do that in a disaster. I didn't know that you were expecting me to do that, or what my role was. And maybe it's just that my role is to go outside and stand there in a certain area of the parking lot, but I didn't know that I was expected to do that. So by giving people a tool that they can use to train their folks in what's expected of them, we provide the training to those key leadership positions so they know what's expected of them. It really makes everybody in the company better prepared to respond.
Spot on. Al, did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, that's great. And you know, because, and here's the thing, for the people listening, reach out and talk to others and find out, you know, validate things, which is why I asked that question, because I don't know Dutch, but it's like, hey, here's what I've always been thinking and doing. And is it really right? Is there something better I can do? I'm not afraid to be told, you know, oh, Al, that's really not a good idea. You know, I want to hear, and then I'll evaluate and say, okay, yeah, I agree with them, or I don't agree with them, or that type of thing. But I always challenge people to make those connections with Dutch and others and find out, especially in your own community, you know, because we've got a lot of preparedness people who, have you ever talked to your EMA guy? No, I really don't know who that is. And shockingly, some of us sit back and go, how can you even function if you don't know your partners?
Yeah.
Yet some people are still out there. So that's why I asked that question and wanted to get Dutch to, you know, am I doing something right? Am I doing something wrong?
Yeah,
Dutch, we call that the sausage making, and it's sometimes the sausage making is better than the sausage itself. So getting together with those groups and working through the processes and all those things are incredibly valuable. Just kind of a funny side story. I was a cop back in the day. I was a lieutenant on our department. I was our SWAT team commander, and we had an incident going on with some flooding that we were trying to deal with, and my boss came to me and said, well, have you contacted emergency management yet? And I said, what the heck is emergency management? And he said, it's this magic phone number. You call them and then stuff just happens. And I was like, well, give me the magic phone number. That's great. So that's kind of my introduction to emergency management was, I'd been on the department for probably 8 years at the time and had no clue that it existed. So you're absolutely right that that needs to be socialized a little bit more and better understood of what the purpose is and what's available to you.
Yeah. And especially, you know, Chris knows, because Chris and Mike and I have talked, emergency preparedness coordinators come from a wide variety of backgrounds. I don't have a clinical background. Chris and Mike do. You have a law enforcement background. You know, we bring our backgrounds. I've got logistics. So we bring our backgrounds together and we start getting stronger and stronger and stronger. I don't try to take care of the trauma coming into the emergency department when I'm there, but I try to help them understand what their role is when the shit hits the fan and you get more, you know, and that's the type of thing that I love about what we all do as a first responder, first receiver, first whatever group, you know, that happens behind the scenes a lot of time. A lot of the regular community doesn't really understand and doesn't really think about, oh, all these things happened. Well, yeah, they happen kind of, as you said, that magic phone number. They happen magically because people communicate, coordinate, and prepare not to get the stars and the banners and the trophies just because we love doing it.
My staff always says that our biggest success is if nobody ever hears about us or knows our name.
Yeah.
If we can accomplish the task and do those support things that we need to do to make somebody else successful and be there in the limelight and take all the credit, that's great. We've done our job and everything's been resolved. So that's the best outcome we can hope for.
Yep, absolutely. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, I think you guys are bringing up, and I keep coming back to it. It's probably not, for those that don't enjoy sports, not very helpful, but you know, the football coach is talking about, it's about process. It's not about outcome, although everybody is looking at the outcome. You can only control certain parts of that, but you can look at the process and the practice. Practices are rarely full scrimmages. You know, you do need to get to those, but we need to practice your role or your function. So the Take 5 program that you were talking about, Dutch, is manifested eventually through my the institution I worked at by doing monthly drills. And I think people understanding the difference between a drill and an exercise, you know, exercise or work on a part. Maybe it's communication. Maybe it's in your department. What's your role in supporting or participating or, you know, just understanding what's happening in a disaster or disruption is really important. And I think with the cyber events that are going on, with some of the shortages, the grid system and all, there's no shortage of opportunities to talk about. You don't have to be catastrophic, but they can be disruptive enough that, hey, we need to put together a plan. Let's have some objectives. Why is this important? And see the merit in that. So absolutely. The theme, a theme kind of comes through, I think, for me, that's how I kind of see it. So you went through as a protective security advisor, saw a lot of cross-pollination, and which, again, to Al's point, that you're kind of giving an example of other states, other areas, other disciplines that could share that information and that process of understanding how emergencies can be supported. And that lasted for about looks like about 6 years, and then 2015 there was a real interesting change in careers, and you did what?
I became the executive director for a program called Safeguard Iowa Partnership. It's a private nonprofit based out of Des Moines, Iowa. It was an opportunity for my wife and I to move back home closer to our grandkids and things like that. But it was a really unique program, and it was something that I'd been part of the development when I was with the state of Iowa, but I never really got to see it come to fruition. But I got a phone call, and it was an opportunity to take over as the executive director of this 501c3, and it is really intended to bring private industry, private business into disaster response. Private industry is a really unique look at how we can respond to disasters. They've got a ton of resources. There are all kinds of things that are available through the private companies, private businesses, and they're always wanting to help, but they've never really had a conduit to get into how do we actually respond to the disaster? Who do we go through? We're going to send stuff, but we don't have any idea what's needed or how to get it there. Safeguard Iowa Partnership was really developed to answer some of those questions, but be there in the emergency operations centers or with incident command as things come up, say, hey, we can help you with that. We've got a company that provides generators or that provides a water hookup for a system. Any number of things that come out of it that really private industry is better equipped to respond to some of those things than our public sector agencies. So this organization was developed in order to bring some of those things into play and be better prepared to respond to any type of disaster for our communities.
And it was genius. Yeah, it's the work you guys did. I know as a hospital, we benefited from a call to Safeguard Iowa to get water when there was ironically there was a flood, but with the flood it disrupted pristine water supply, and so we needed water, and the usual channels, back channels, were going to take forever. And I called to Safeguard Iowa, and a Walmart truck later, we had more than enough water for that situation. And I think Al could share, but with the conference that he does in his area, with some of those private providers and all, they have got a lot of really interesting perspectives, but great resources. And as you mentioned, the distribution services, that's what they excel in, right? The Walmarts and the Amazons and stuff like that. So, wow, awesome. And then, did you do training for them as well? I mean, was it bringing them both together to speak a common language? How did that work?
Yeah, you bet. So the training that we did was really, we did a lot of polling. So we tried to figure out what was needed and what the private companies wanted to see. And surprisingly, we talked about ICS earlier. One of the things they came back and said, we don't know how you government agencies respond during a disaster. Can you teach us that ICS stuff? I'm like, but sure, yeah, we're happy to come out and do that. So we started teaching ICS to private businesses, but we also started teaching things like active threat response for private industry, not the law enforcement side of things, but kind of the run, hide, fight component of now you've got an active threat or violence in the workplace. How do you respond? How do you prevent those things from happening? Can you recognize those things? We taught a lot of business continuity development for our private sector partners and how to work that into a continuity of government scheme with your government partners so that you guys are working together and you better understand each other's plans so they don't conflict with each other, but they complement each other. So a lot of the outreach was developed. It's still ongoing. Safeguard Iowa is still very active in Iowa. The gentleman that took my place he was a former postal inspector that it kind of a small world thing, but he was a postal inspector while I was working as an undercover narcotics officer, and we got to know each other back then because he'd be calling me saying, I've got to deliver this package, but we think it's a bad thing. And so we worked together back then, but I got to know him. Jay's a fantastic guy that is continuing that same type of outreach to our business partners, that he's really good at the training education piece of things. And that complements each other. That complements everything. So getting those government sectors partners to better understand how to fit the private sector into the response makes a better response all around. It makes the recovery that much easier. We've recently gotten more into the recovery components of how to look at things. It's a fairly new requirement from FEMA that we're developing recovery annexes to our comprehensive emergency plans. Having that private sector involvement in the recovery plans, all of them, whether it's housing or industry or infrastructure, whatever it is, understanding how they recover from a disaster, what their plans say, things like that, really helps the government better understand where they need to focus their efforts and their resources.
Who was the most surprising member, maybe while during your tenure there? Was there anybody that became a part of it, or a sector that became a part of it that was like, who'd have thought?
There were so many. We had when I left, I think we had 1,700 businesses that were partners in Safeguard Iowa.
Wow!
And it ranged from the one that comes to mind is it was a very small mom and pop candle shop that wanted to protect their business. They wanted to better understand what plans they needed to have in place. And even though I think they had 8 employees, they were one of the most active groups that we had. They were at every single meeting. They were at every single training. They had input to things, really, really insightful, good input to things. But we had other giant corporations there at the table that they'd send 20 people that never spoke up. So sometimes Jan's Candle Shop was 100% a better partner. But it was really neat to watch those larger corporations interact with the smaller organizations, willing to share their ideas and sometimes share their plans. This is what we do in a disaster. This is how we react to that. Please steal this. Please use it to your advantage. And even competitors. We had one example of a competitor. We had two companies that um, I wouldn't say they were at each other's throats, but they were definitely um, against each other most of the time.
Adversarial. Yeah.
There you go. That's a great word for it. But I watched them walk through an agreement during one of our trainings where during a disaster, if they were impacted and couldn't provide service to their partners, then their competitor was going to take over their customer base until they could recover, and then they were going to give them back, and
Wow.
vice versa. And I was like, yeah, that's great on paper, but that's probably never going to happen. And I'll be darned if about a year later we had river flooding and along one of the major rivers in Iowa, and I watched that company struggling to meet anything. One of their offices got completely flooded out, and they transferred the business, and it worked as effectively as they had described it on paper. They transferred their
Amazing.
business over. They didn't lose. If you lose the confidence of your customers, that is one of the hardest things that you'll ever have to regain again. But because they were able to transfer that to one of their competitors for a short period of time until they could get back up, they didn't lose that customer base as a result of that. And they got their customers back, never actually lost them, because they knew that company was more concerned about keeping them than making a dollar at that point.
I think we've seen that with hospitals. They've shifted probably in the last decade. It used to be so competitive.
Yeah.
They wouldn't even participate in emergency management or share numbers, bed availability, and so on. And I think COVID certainly shook that to the core. And there's a lot less of a, hey, how can we sustain the system? It doesn't quite work as we had imagined in a disaster where it's an advantage to have your competitor not do well. So we should say before we forget, Safeguard Iowa, like you said, is still a viable organization. People should reach out to it. Maybe in our description for this podcast, we'll include a link to that if that sounds reasonable to Safeguard Iowa.
You bet. That'd be fantastic. And I'll let Jay know that that's going to happen. We still talk pretty frequently, so I'll let him know. And I appreciate that as well. They are a very viable organization. They very effective in what they do. So really helpful to our state.
Yeah. So people need to stay connected regardless of your long-term care facility, clinic, nursing, hospital, specialty hospital. There's a place at the table for everybody at Safeguard Iowa Partnership as we understand it. And it would be, you would benefit from it and they would benefit from it as well. Because of time, let's kind of touch on, and I'm talking to you, Al, about this too. Let's just kind of touch on your transition to Polk County and some of the stuff you're working on. But I think we've got another podcast and maybe involve AJ as well, AJ Mum, and the two of you can talk more about how the state's largest metropolitan area and how you guys manage emergency management and some of the stuff that goes through there. So, but to bring it full circle and bring people up to date to where you're at today, was it 2000? 2000, I think you and COVID rolled into Polk County.
Yeah, actually, it was 2020 when I came to Polk County. Believe it or not, I've only been here 4 years. Might seem like some folks that it's been longer than that, but 4 years. It's
wow.
The role here is I'm the deputy director, so I handle a lot of the day-to-day operations of emergency management within Polk County, and I leave a lot of the political stuff to AJ, which is fantastic for me. So he can deal with our elected officials, and I can work on development of our comprehensive plans, look for future planning, contingency plans, those kind of things. And we have an amazing staff here. We also run our 911 system through Polk County Emergency Management. So the Polk County or the 911 emergency coordinator is also housed with us. We have a resiliency coordinator now. We have somebody that is dedicated to hazardous materials response, those kind of things, and incredibly knowledgeable, well-rounded staff. So I can't say enough good things about the folks we've got on board here.
What's your population base, generally speaking? I mean, what are you guys serving?
Yeah, it's roughly 525,000 in the Des Moines metro area, but we actually serve a much larger area, and we share a lot of services with folks like Dallas County. Some of our cities have expanded into Dallas and Warren counties, so we do a lot of work together with other counties, bordering counties. Right around it depends on when you look at it. If you're looking at it at nighttime, it's right around 525,000. During the day, we have a surge, so we're closer to 600,000 during the day.
So lights on and lights off numbers. And your commission that you guys are responsible for is just Polk County, though, right? I mean, kind of defined by law is
Yep,
Polk
that is
County.
correct.
But
Yep.
but clearly, like you said, activities, services, residents are moving across lines. So you're networking with all those folks as well as Safeguard Iowa and all the other political entities and all. So looking back at this career so far, of everything you've been involved with, I mean, you've had a really unique perspective. What are some things that you could pass along to people that, they're scratching their head saying, well, emergency management, I'm not sure what it's all about, who I should be talking to. What got some words of wisdom before I kick it over to Al and Al wraps this up?
Yeah, you bet. Don't be afraid to reach out. There's so many people that work in the emergency management field, whether it's private businesses. Many of those are hiring emergency management positions right now. Your government agency, emergency management coordinators, please by all means reach out. Find out more about what's going on in your communities. And we love it to have visitors come in and talk to us about emergency management and what we do. Give tours of our facilities, walk through. We're a little bit different here in Polk County because we've got a larger agency, but even those one-man positions, one-person positions, I should say, they've got a lot to offer. There's just a ton of training, education opportunities, partnership building. They are one of the most connected organizations that you're ever going to find because they're always searching for resources. They're always looking for how can I do better or what can I do next, and always trying to do the next best thing. So please reach out by all means and get to know those folks that are in those positions in your communities.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's well said. You're a switchboard of resources, right? In the old school vision of a switchboard where you connect people across disciplines and areas, and having those conversations and meeting with you before a disaster, as the old adage says, makes a lot more sense than meeting during a disaster. So give a call. And again, we'll maybe put some contact information in our write-up on this.
Great.
Al, where are we at?
Well, when you talked about the switchboard and you were going like this, pulling up, you lost half our audience because the young people are going, what is Chris talking about? I go out and Google it. It'll be funny. Yeah, go out and Google it. I want to, before we wrap up, I want to thank you, Dutch, for being involved in something that I brought into the hospital that was absolutely phenomenal, and that's the Run, Hide, Fight program. There are other opportunities and programs out there, but Run, Hide, Fight being Department of Homeland Security, and the key word, free.
Yep.
And DHS supports it. We brought it in, and it has been phenomenal. And I know the schools use something several of the schools use something different, but the Run, Hide, Fight program is just an amazing program, something good that you guys worked on. So thank you for being a part of that. So yeah, I like this, and Chris, I like your idea. Let's follow up with Dutch and you, AJ, and I don't know, is it AJ?
Yeah, AJ Mum. Yep.
Okay, I don't know AJ either, so that'll be a first for me as well. But let's follow up with that. That would be another great podcast. So.
Well, Al, I always I drink coffee, so if you're in town sometime, give me a call and we'll grab a cup of coffee somewhere.
You know what? That's a deal because I have several connections out in Des Moines / Ankeny. So, yep, sounds good.
Very good.
Awesome. Thank you again, Dutch. Thanks, Al, for directing our technical efforts while Mike is out on assignment. We want to remind everybody to subscribe. There's a subscribe button on YouTube, and that'll allow you to get notified of when the next episode is up and posted. Anything else, Al?
We'll also, yeah, we'll
Yep.
also, the thing that Mike always says, and it's very true, you know, hey, get on there, look at Readiness Rewired. If you have comments for us, go to readinessrewired@gmail.com, send us an email. We'll be happy to look at that. And on this podcast and on others, you know, give us that thumbs up if you like us. As Mike says, give us a thumbs down if you think we suck. You know, hey, we want to know so we can get better, because we're doing this for fun. And yeah, we enjoy it. So Dutch, thank you very much for spending time with us today. It has been awesome and very nice to meet you for the first time, and hopefully not the last.
Ditto.
We'll do a coffee.
You bet. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on, guys.
You bet.